I was a sophomore at a university in Oregon in 1996, living in a dorm called Stanton Residence with 3 friends, Tyler, Jess, and Marco. It was Halloween night, and campus was buzzing. People were dressed up, heading to parties, blasting Smashing Pumpkins or Nirvana from open dorm windows. We didn't have much planned, and after a couple of cheap beers, Tyler came up with what he called the perfect Halloween prank. He suggested posting fake updates to the student message board, the one people used for ride shares and study group announcements, claiming there was an escaped killer loose near campus. The idea was to make it sound just believable enough to freak people out. We started with something simple. Alert! Police scanner reports escaped inmates spotted near campus. Stay inside. Jess thought it was too real, but Marco was already typing. Within minutes, replies started rolling in. People asking if it was true, others saying they heard something too. It was hilarious at first. The kind of dumb college thing you do before thinking about consequences. Tyler kept feeding updates, saying the man was last seen near the library. We laughed at how people seemed to buy it. But then, about 20 minutes later, someone replied to the thread with something none of us had written. It said, "He's at Stanton Residence now." We stared at each other, thinking maybe another student was joining in on the joke. Tyler typed back, "Nice try. We're the ones making this up," but a minute later, another post appeared. "No, you're not. We suspected someone else in the dorm had figured out it was us and was just trying to mess with us." Still, I remember the way Jess's smile faded when she refreshed the thread and saw a new comment. "I see you." The timestamp showed it was posted seconds ago. We all looked around the room. The door was closed, the hallway quiet except for the muffled sound of music and laughter from another floor. Tyler, who'd been drinking the most, grinned and said, "Okay, whoever you are, nice touch." He typed back something cocky, calling the person out. Less than a minute later, another reply came. Red flannel, black hair, standing by the desk. We all froze. Tyler was wearing a red flannel shirt. None of us were laughing now. Marco jumped up, yanked open the door, and looked up and down the hallway. Nothing but a couple of costumed students heading to a party. We sat there in uneasy silence until Jess said maybe we should stop posting and go to the party too, just to shake it off. So we locked up the room and headed out, pretending to laugh again, though none of us really could. We stayed at a house 2 blocks away for about an hour before deciding to head back. When we got to our floor, the hallway lights were dimmed. They always flickered at night, but that night they felt darker than usual. Tyler reached for our door and stopped. Someone had slid a folded piece of paper under it. It was blank on the outside. Inside, in messy handwriting, it said, "I liked your story." We stood there in the hallway for a long time, just staring at that note. Jess wanted to call campus security, but Tyler insisted it had to be someone from our dorm who saw the posts and wanted to freak us out. He tore up the paper and tossed it in the trash, but I remember thinking about how the handwriting looked rushed, like whoever wrote it had done it right outside our door. That thought stuck with me the rest of the night. None of us went to sleep right away. We ended up sitting around the common area, half joking, half listening for footsteps. Around 3 a.m., I got up to use the bathroom. The hallway was silent except for the hum of the vending machine. On my way back, I noticed the light from our door was spilling into the hall. The door wasn't closed all the way. I was sure we'd locked it earlier. When I pushed it open, everyone was asleep. Tyler was snoring on the couch. The window by his head was open, the cold October air coming through. I walked over to close it and froze. Written on the fogged-up glass were the words, "Found you." We moved out of that dorm 2 weeks later. Campus police never found who was behind it. The forum posts kept going for another few days, though. Someone using our usernames kept adding fake updates about the killer's movements, even after we deleted the thread. One of the last messages said, "Don't stop telling the story. I'm not done yet." Back in 2015, my girlfriend Emily and I decided to do something different for Halloween. Skip the city parties and head up to Banff National Park for a quiet camping trip. We both lived in Calgary and had spent the last few years working non-stop, so the idea of a few days with no phones or traffic sounded perfect. We packed the car early that Friday morning, the day before Halloween, and drove up through Canmore into Banff. By the time we reached the Two Jack Lakeside campground, the air was crisp and cold, and most of the trees were already bare. It was late in the season, and hardly anyone else was there. We picked a site near the water, just far enough from the main road that you couldn't hear cars. Emily joked that it felt like the start of a horror movie, camping in the woods on Halloween, but I laughed it off. We set up our tent, built a small fire, and cooked some chili over the camp stove. As the sun went down behind Mount Rundle, the temperature dropped fast. The lake turned black, the forest went quiet, and for a while the only sound was the fire crackling. Around 9, we heard what sounded like a group of kids laughing somewhere down the trail, maybe other campers messing around. It didn't bother us. If anything, it made the place feel less empty. By 10:30, the laughter had stopped. We turned in for the night, zipped up tight inside the tent. I was drifting off when I heard it, something moving through the leaves outside, slow and uneven. I froze, listening. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal rustling around for food either. The steps were too heavy, too spaced out, like someone walking carefully. I glanced at Emily, but she was already awake, staring at the ceiling of the tent. Neither of us said anything for a while. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the sound stopped. I remember whispering, "Probably just another camper," but I didn't believe it. We lay there wide awake, waiting for the noise to start again. The next morning, Emily said she hadn't slept at all. I dozed off a few times, but every snap of a twig jolted me awake. When I stepped outside the tent, the ground was covered in frost, and there were footprints in the dirt. Boot prints, not animal tracks, leading from the trees to about 20 feet behind our tent before turning back toward the woods. I followed them for a while, but they just disappeared into the pine needles. Emily wanted to pack up right then, but I convinced her to stay at least through the night. I told her it was probably a hiker who'd gotten lost. Still, the prints didn't sit right with me. They were too close. Whoever it was had been watching us. We spent most of the day hiking near Johnson Lake to take our minds off it. It was Halloween, but out there you wouldn't have known. No decorations, no trick-or-treaters, just silence and cold air. When we got back to camp before sunset, there was something odd. One of our folding chairs was moved closer to the fire pit, even though we'd both left it folded and leaning against a tree. Nothing else was missing or disturbed, but the sight of that chair set off a nervous feeling I couldn't shake. Emily swore she'd heard voices in the woods while we were heading back to our tent, faint but distant, and now she was convinced someone had been there. That night, we kept the fire going longer, partly for warmth and partly for comfort. Around 11, after the flames died down, we crawled into the tent and left one of the lanterns burning low. The woods were dead quiet again. Then, sometime past midnight, there it was, the same slow crunching in the leaves, this time closer. Emily whispered my name, her voice trembling. The footsteps stopped right outside our tent. I reached for the flashlight and clicked it on, pointing it toward the fabric. A tall shadow was cast across it, broad shoulders, motionless. I didn't say a word. Neither did Emily. We just stared as the shadow lingered for what felt like a full minute before it finally backed away and vanished into the dark. We stayed frozen for a long time, waiting to hear if the footsteps would return, but they never did. Eventually, I whispered that we needed to leave at first light. Emily nodded, clutching her sleeping bag like a shield. Neither of us slept after that. As soon as the sky started to lighten, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The air was icy, my breath visible. All around the tent were more boot prints, this time circling it, as if whoever it was had walked around us several times during the night. What made it worse was that the prints led to the back of our car, where the handle on the driver's door was dusted with frost, except for one clean, hand-shaped spot. We packed up in silence and drove toward the main road. When we reached the park gate, I stopped at the ranger station to tell them what happened. The ranger was calm, but clearly uneasy. He said there had been a few reports that weekend of tents being approached at night, mostly from couples camping farther off trail. No thefts, no assaults, just people saying they'd heard someone walking around or standing near their tents. They never found anyone. He said they suspected it might be a local who'd been camping illegally in the woods, someone who liked scaring visitors. The ranger told us to report it if we saw anything else, then waved us through. We left Banff that morning and drove straight back to Calgary. I didn't tell Emily this part until months later, but when we stopped for gas just outside of Canmore, I found something wedged under the rear windshield wiper, a Polaroid photo. It was of our tent from the night before, taken from maybe 20 feet away. You could see our silhouettes inside through the thin fabric, the lantern light glowing. Whoever had been watching us wasn't some lost hiker. They'd been standing there, camera in hand, while we were inside pretending not to breathe. I work for a mid-sized tech company in Kyoto, and like every year, we had our Halloween party at a small izakaya near Shijo Street. I usually don't drink much, but that night I had a few drinks, and by the time it ended, it was close to midnight. 4 of us, myself, Satoshi, Mayumi, and Kenji, decided to share a ride home since we were all living in Kameoka. Our conversation was lighthearted, joking about costumes and office gossip, and for a while, it felt like any other late-night drive after work. We took the regular route through the northern part of the city, passing small residential streets and the occasional convenience store still lit for late-night shoppers. I remember laughing when Kenji nearly missed a turn because he was trying to scare Mayumi with a fake ghost story. Everything felt normal, the kind of tired but comfortable camaraderie you get after a long workday. Kyoto was quiet, the streets damp from a brief evening drizzle, and the air smelled faintly of roasted chestnuts from a vendor we passed. Things started to change when we decided to take a detour through the Kiyotaki Tunnel. Rumor has it the place is haunted, and we figured Halloween would be the perfect night to see for ourselves. But just before entering, our car, an aging Toyota Corolla, started coughing and eventually died on the narrow road leading into the tunnel. We tried the ignition a few times, but nothing worked. Mayumi called the roadside assistance number on her cell phone, but the signal was weak. That's when we noticed the traffic light at the tunnel entrance, normally green, flicker red repeatedly, as if warning us not to proceed. None of us said anything. It was more unsettling than frightening, but the unease settled over us like the fog rolling in from the mountains. We decided to stay in the car while we waited for help, the engine still dead and the tunnel looming ahead like a dark mouth. The first strange thing happened almost immediately. I could swear I heard someone whispering our names. Kenji. Satoshi. It was faint at first, like the wind moving through the tunnel, but it grew more distinct. Mayumi leaned forward to look into the tunnel, laughing nervously, saying it was probably some drunk kids playing a joke. But none of us saw anyone, and the voice kept coming, soft and deliberate, calling each of us by name. Then the reflections in the windows started moving, and not with us. I noticed a shadow cross the passenger side window, and when I turned, it wasn't aligned with anyone in the car. Kenji thought it was his own reflection, but I saw it too. Tall, thin, standing still in the trees along the side of the road outside the tunnel. Every time we looked, it seemed to move slightly, though the trees didn't rustle. I tried to rationalize it as some optical illusion caused by the wet road and the tunnel lights, but there was no mistaking the way it paused, like it was watching us. By now, tension had settled in the car. Our phones were mostly dead. No signal, no light from outside the tunnel except for that flickering red at the entrance. Satoshi suggested we should try to push the car back onto the main road, but as soon as he opened the door, the whispering voice rose, closer, urgent. I felt my stomach knot. We all froze. Something wasn't right. Whatever it was, it knew we were there, and for the first time, it felt like we weren't alone in the tunnel or the woods surrounding it. Satoshi shut the door hard and locked it, his hand shaking slightly. We sat in silence, listening. The voice had stopped, but the red light from the tunnel entrance started to flash faster, almost like it was warning us. Then, faintly, I heard the sound of shoes scraping against gravel, slow and steady, coming from the tunnel. We all turned toward it at once. A figure was standing just inside the red glow, a woman, maybe, in a white blouse. I couldn't see her face, only her outline. Satoshi reached for his phone to use the light, but before he could turn it on, the figure moved, fast, disappearing back into the dark. That was enough. Kenji grabbed the door handle and shouted that we were getting out. He jumped from the car and ran toward the main road, but after a few seconds, he stopped dead. "There's someone in the woods," he called back, his voice cracking. From where I sat, I could see faint movement between the trees, a reflection, like eyes catching light that wasn't there. Mayumi began to cry quietly, and I felt that same chill crawl down my spine as I turned to look at the tunnel again. This time, I could see more than one shadow standing at the entrance. They were motionless, facing us. Finally, the sound of an approaching car's engine broke through the stillness. Headlights washed over us, and when I looked back, the tunnel was empty. The woman, the shadows, the red light, gone. A middle-aged truck driver stopped to help us start the engine, and when we told him what we'd seen, his face went pale. "You shouldn't stop here," he said quietly. "People disappear near that tunnel. They say it calls them back." None of us answered. We rode back to Kyoto in silence, and to this day, I still remember hearing my name echo from that tunnel just before the red light went out.